A reading from Matthew's Gospel, chapter 14, beginning to read at verse 22. Immediately he made the disciples get into the boat and go on ahead to the other side, while he dismissed the crowds. And after he had dismissed the crowds, he went up the mountain by himself to pray. When evening came, he was there alone, but by this time the boat, battered by the waves, was far from the land, for the wind was against them. And early in the morning he came walking towards them on the lake. But when the disciples saw him walking on the lake, they were terrified, saying, "It is a ghost," and they cried out in fear. But immediately Jesus spoke to them and said, "Take heart, it is I. Do not be afraid." Peter answered him, "Lord, if it is you, command me to come to you on the water." He said, "Come." So Peter got out of the boat, started walking on the water, and came towards Jesus. But when he noticed the strong wind, he became frightened, and beginning to sink, he cried out, "Lord, save me." Jesus immediately reached out his hand and caught him, saying to him, "You of little faith, why did you doubt?" When they got into the boat, the wind ceased, and those in the boat worshipped him, saying, "Truly you are the Son of God." Today's Gospel reading is a wonderful story of faith and of the power of God in times of difficulty. A story connected to the Old Testament, and ends with the first acknowledgement by the disciples that Jesus is the Son of God. Matthew writes to a mainly Jewish community who are now following Jesus and having their struggle with faith under times of persecution. This story would have been important in encouraging them through those difficult times. The community has been raised in the Old Testament scriptures, and in Jewish writings the sea was the place of evil and demons. There are ancient myths which describe how when God made the world and separated out the dry land, he had to fight against the evil, monstrous forces that lived in the waters of the sea. The Old Testament Psalms and the books of the prophets speak about how God alone was able to overcome the forces of evil living in and coming out from the sea. In the story, Jesus first prays and then walks across the sea to meet the disciples who are struggling in their boat against a strong wind. The disciples are naturally terrified, thinking Jesus might be a ghost. Jesus says, "It is I, do not be afraid." The English translation from the Greek for this verse is "it is I," but the literal translation is "I am," or Yahweh, the holy name of God in the Old Testament. In Jesus saying, "I am," Matthew is revealing Jesus' identity, his oneness with God himself. Peter wants to act as Jesus does, but when he experiences the strength of the waves, he panics and nearly drowns. Peter's faith in Jesus is disturbed by the power of the storm, but Jesus reaches out to him. Despite Peter's inadequate faith, Jesus is there to save him. "Why did you doubt?" Jesus asks him. Not to blame him for trying to do what Jesus did, but for not having a strong enough faith. As they get into the boat, the wind drops, and just as walking on the water demonstrates the power of God, so stilling the waters is also a sign of that power. Throughout Matthew's Gospel, Jesus exercises power and displays actions that only God can do. In Matthew's Gospel, it feels more than God has acted through Jesus, but rather that God shares his divine power with his Son. Those early friends of Jesus saw in his life God revealed. They saw love in action, and they wanted to follow him and do the things he did. This story of faith in Matthew's Gospel, of Peter taking the risk of doing what Jesus did, helps us to think about our own faith and sometimes lack of it. When we try to follow Jesus, it can feel very risky at times, and maybe our faith wavers and we feel we are sinking. It is then we need to hold on to the belief that Jesus is there, reaching out to help us. I would like to end with a prayer. Give us, Lord, the grace to walk by faith through every storm of life, to keep our eyes on you. And when we fail to see or start to sink, stretch out your hand to raise us up. So may we learn to hold to you through good and ill until we come to the haven where we would be, in everlasting joy and peace. Amen.